All right, here we are in our speedy exploration of the Roman Empire, and now we are going to look at people. All right, there's two different sets of people that we're going to kind of take a look at. One are going to be the Roman emperors, and these are the early Roman emperors, so the people of the Pax Romana up until its end. I will try to make this light on stories about people, but I'm just going to take us through a little tour of the major families and the major emperors that have an impact on the development of, let's call, the first couple centuries of the Roman Empire. Okay, so here's Julius Caesar. He's never, an emperor or a king by, title, but definitely somebody that kind of existed in that realm. He had claimed himself to be dictator for life. Well, if you're dictator for life and you control the military and you control the money and you have, all the power of the government, kind of makes you an emperor, right? But he never was. All right. So there's Julius Caesar, Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BCE, stabbed to death in the Senate. And then there's the Civil War to see who's going to gain control after his death. Well, who gains control is his adopted nephew, Octavian, who will be named Augustus, who is considered the first emperor of the Roman Empire. All right. So what does Augustus do? This is where you should, pay a little of attention and, a little new information here that matters. Well, Augustus is going to do the same thing for the Roman Empire that every emperor we have learned about does. He starts building projects, putting in roads so that people can travel and trade. Well, then those roads aren't very safe, so he creates this professional military, including the Praetorian Guard, that will help protect Rome, but also keep the roads and travelers in the Roman Empire safe so they can do their business. He standardizes coinage around the Roman Empire so that Roman coins will be used in, Spain and in Gaul and in the Near East and all these other places that the empire has spread. All right. All of these things will be successes of Caesar Augustus. He is going to, start the major building projects that kind of typify the Roman Empire. He is going to start an incredible principle based off of that idea that everybody ought to fall under, Roman law. So you remember the 12 tables and that kind of thing. So he expands that Roman law base and it introduces this idea that says that people should be considered innocent until they are proven guilty in a court of law. Well, that idea is going to go forward to inspire eventually English common law and the law codes of the United States of America. He does all these different things that impact the development of Rome, the development of the empire, also the development of Western civilization. There's one thing that he does very, very poorly. He does not plan for succession. Who's going to come after him and how does a person after him arrive? Remember, he never called himself emperor. He has children. His children die. He names nephews. They die. He names this person. They die. All these people die because my man, who, by the way, didn't have great health, he lives to be like 80 years old in an environment where the average lifespan is 36. And so he becomes emperor in 27 BCE. That's the start of the Pax Romana. He doesn't die until 14 CE. Do the math on it. That's 41 years as emperor. By the time he does actually die, who is coming after him has fallen down to his former general bodyguard who had been adopted by him in his late age. This guy named Tiberius, Tiberius is then going to rule for, I think, 29 years. He goes from 14 to 41. So what is that math? 27 years. So between these two guys, Augustus and his handpicked successor, you're looking at 65, 70 years of continuous rule. So you want to know why the empire was so stable early on? The length of their lives and rule is a big reason. All right. So here's Augustus. The first person and the member of the family known as the Julio-Claudians. I wouldn't look too deep into this family tree because it is incredibly confusing. from Julius Caesar down to, all of these different, family members and cousins having children with aunts and uncles and people marrying each other. It's very confusing. You can look through it if you want. Where we are right here is this. Here is Julius Caesar. Okay, here's Julius Caesar. And here is his adopted son, Gaius Octavius, who is Augustus. And I sometimes call him Caesar Augustus. Caesar becomes a term of honor because of Julius Caesar. On down to his adopted child, who's Tiberius Claudius. And because Claudius was adopted by him, we get Julio from Julius Caesar, Claudius from Tiberius, and this family that will trickle on down, who we are going to talk about right now. The Julio-Claudian family, it's lucky that the empire was set up to be stable and that most of his enemies had been put down, because you know what? A lot of these guys were intense. They were intense, and some of them were cruel and some of them were kind of crazy. And some of the information we have about them maybe is not that great, because they were so disliked that the people who wrote down the stories about them probably made them sound, worse than they were. But the Julio-Claudians that we're looking at, we go from Augustus to Tiberius, to Caligula, to Claudius, to Nero. And this is the Julio-Claudian family. So what do we need to know about them? Well, there was a lot of cruelty from them. I mean, if you give a person all power, it is tempting sometimes for those people to abuse that power. And so we get with them some persecutions for religious minorities. That's where we see some of the early persecutions of the Christians that we'll talk about with Christianity. This guy right here, Tiberius, that early Jesus movement, he's going to have some persecution. Nero, this fellow right here, he is going to be the guy who executes Paul, who writes most of the New Testament, and Peter, who was, at the right hand of Jesus and in building the church in Rome. He's going to be the guy that executes them. Caligula, this guy's nuts. I wish we could talk about him a ton. He names his horse Consul. He dresses like a woman and sneaks around Rome to spy on people. He almost bankrupts Rome. He spends all of this money to build a bridge like 3 inches under the ocean so he can ride his horse across the bridge to trick the poor people into thinking that he's riding on water and he's a god. He claims that he conquers the Atlantic Ocean, and so he's claimed it for Rome because he's conquered it, and he makes all of his soldiers haul wagons of seashells back to Rome for parades. All of the nutty stuff that you may have heard of about Roman emperors, a lot of it comes from these propaganda stories that come out about the Julio-Claudians. There are a lot of assassinations. They kill their family members. There's all types of craziness and feasting and all these types of stuff. But here at the end, when I say assassination, it is very likely that Tiberius could have been killed by Caligula. We know that Caligula was killed by his bodyguards. They hacked him up with swords and killed his wife and killed his child and all kinds of stuff. But they left his uncle Claudius alive. But then later, Claudius was killed by his wife and his stepson, who is Nero. And then Nero was forced to commit suicide by the Praetorian guards that were trying to elect him. So you've just got assassination, suicide. I mean, whatever. And that's where so many of the stories of the excesses of Rome go on. But while this stuff is going on, the actual empire is thriving. The Pax Romana, hundreds of years of peace and stability that's happening. And some of it has to be attributed to their leadership. Okay? Caligula, Nero, these guys almost bankrupt the Roman Empire, though. They spent so much money on building stuff and building palaces and all this kind of stuff. So there is a little kind of civil war in the year 68. You're going to get these 4 guys that are called the army emperors that come out. Otho, Vitellius, Galba, killed, killed and has his head cut off and paraded around Rome. But the fourth guy that comes out of the army emperors, remember, a lot of the Roman emperors are going to be generals because the troops are loyal to him, is going to be this guy. His name is Vespasian. This is the beginning of the Flavian emperors. So you've got Vespasian, you've got Titan or Titus, and you've got Domitian that are the Flavian emperors. And they come and they do some things like, for instance, Vespasian restores the wealth of the empire. He refills the treasury by creating tax systems and recycling programs and all kinds of stuff. Even though Titus is only alive for 2 years, 79 to 81 as emperor before he is probably poisoned. He's going to do some important things that restore people's faith in the emperors of Rome. For instance, while the people of Pompeii and Herculaneum and some other Roman towns are affected by that explosion at Mount Vesuvius, he sends a whole lot of money to help out the people that were affected by that volcano explosion that lived. The Flavian emperors will build the Colosseum, and they will put all of the money back into the budget of Rome, living it in much better place. So they're going to be in there. I almost feel like I ought to have a year chart for this. They're going to be in there from, I think, 69 to 96 CE. And the only reason I'm giving you the year countdowns, by the way, it's not to intimidate you. I'm not going to ask you all these years. It's just that we're moving from when the Pax Romana starts in 27 to when it ends in 180, right? So we are counting down. So now we're 84 years from the end of this Roman peace, and we're just knocking off emperors left and right? So we get to the era of the 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and Antoninus Pius. All of these, these brilliantly good emperors that come on. It's funny because they build stuff and they expand the Roman Empire to its biggest size, and we're in a time of peace. It's funny, we know less about these guys than we do about the earlier guys that are kind of nutty and all this fighting and stuff. You know why we don't know a whole lot about them? Because they were good emperors. There weren't assassinations. There weren't wars. People weren't writing all these stories about how awful they were. They weren't awful. They were good people, and they were from all over the empire. Trajan is Spanish, etc. So, they represented the empire because they had the diversity of the empire there, and they looked out for everybody that was in the empire. I will talk specifically about one of these guys. I'd love to talk about 3 of these guys, but I'm going to talk about one of these guys. And that guy is Marcus Aurelius. This is Marcus Aurelius. I want to talk about him for a minute because if you remember back to learning about Plato in Greek philosophy, Plato said that, that what people really need is to be ruled by a philosopher. Well, Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher. Marcus Aurelius will write one of the greatest books on Stoic philosophy that ever exists. All right. He writes a book called Meditations, and he doesn't really write it to be a book. It's literally just kind of his daily meditations. And then we ended up going back and reading it over time. And I've read it several times. Here's a person that is trying to teach men how to live at peace when the conditions around you are struggle. And there's a lot of lessons for us in a very difficult year in world history and American history in 2020 to look at the lessons that he wrote down about how to live with peace inside ourselves, even when the world around us is not at peace. And it's strange that he wrote this because he was trying to improve how he lived his life. Because for a person that was so meditative about the world that we live in, he lived as the emperor of Rome almost in constant war, solidifying the borders. But he was in those wars so that the empire itself could remain stable and in peace. It's funny that somebody so thoughtful as Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors, would be replaced by the person that ends the Pax Romana, because Marcus Aurelius will die in the year 180. And if you remember the Pax Romana starts in the year 27 BCE and it goes to the year 180 CE, which is the death of Marcus Aurelius, 207 years. That Pax Romana of peace and stability in the Roman Empire, the longest period of peace that the Western world has ever seen. And then when Marcus Aurelius dies, the peace dies with him because he is replaced by his just awful son. This is his son, Commodus. Commodus is going to be the emperor of Rome for 12 years, from 180 to 192. But the peace of Rome dies with his father because Commodus comes in and he brings anything but peace. He is vain. He is stupid. He is violent. He abuses people. He goes into the Colosseum and has disabled people executed for public entertainment, including, veterans that have been wounded fighting in the Roman army and in the Roman military. He kills just thousands and thousands of people and animals in blood sport, just chaos. He tries to erase the Roman calendar and have every month named after him. He just brings chaos to a once stable empire. And with his assassination, which does eventually come, because that seems to be the way that chaotic emperors' lives always end, is by being assassinated. He was strangled to death in his bathtub. With his assassination, the empire will lose that peace and stability and spend decades and decades at the verge of falling apart until we get into a period of later emperors that we will learn about next week. Men like Constantine the Great and Diocletian, okay? And so more with the early emperors, there's a couple of people that stand out. Obviously you need to remember the contributions of Augustus. Maybe the chaos of some of the earlier Julio Claudians is important. The five good emperors and the fact that they maintain that stability. They maintain that peace. And Marcus Aurelius is kind of the zenith of the end of the Pax Romana as it collapses in the hands of his son. But we're not going to talk about the collapse yet, okay? But because we just zipped over more than 200 years of Roman leadership in the form of the emperors. Instead, we are going to take a few minutes and we are going to talk about the major people that emerge in this early Roman Empire and on later into the Roman Empire, but we're going to kind of wedge them into this section and just include them as people that we need to know. So, the people of, the Roman Empire, the people of the Pax Romana. So kind of like we did with the Greeks, we're going to look at the major cultural contributors of the Roman Empire. Now, look, Rome doesn't produce as many great thinkers as the Golden Age did in Athens. Rome is more about governance and bureaucracy and empire than they are about art and science and stuff. They were great borrowers and probably the greatest writer that they produced in the terms of literature was a man named Virgil. He wrote something called the Aeneid, which is an epic story about the Trojan Wars. Ooh, Trojan Wars, like Homer. Exactly. He borrows from the ideas of Homer, and he will write the Aeneid about the Trojan Wars. But he ties the foundations of Roman society to the foundations of the Greek Golden Age. And so that's the tie-in that we get here. So remember when I said that, nobody influences the Romans more than the Greeks. So think about it in the terms of, well, a republic is kind of democratic. Thank you, Greeks. Columns for architectures. Thank you, Greeks. We borrow your gods. Thanks, Greeks. We borrow your literature. Thank you, Greeks. Okay? So great borrowers. Virgil and the Aeneid, an epic tale about the Trojan Wars and the founding of Rome. Okay. Speaking of, we have Plutarch, who is a poet. He writes an epic tale, a poem called Parallel Lives, which compares the ancient Greeks to modern Romans. All right. And so he was famous for making these ties. You may also notice this statue of Plutarch is done in that Greek statuary style. All right. I don't need a friend who changes when I change and who nods when I nod. My shadow does that much better. I do not need a shadow, but I need a man as a companion. Parallel lives, right? So we've got Virgil and the Aeneid, Plutarch and Parallel Lives. Okay, let's see who else we can compare to Greek contributors. Well, we learned about the spa people from ancient Greece, and if you think about, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. In the world of philosophy in Rome, you need to think of Marcus Aurelius. All right, an educated man in a world at war, the writer of Meditations, which recorded his private notes and ideas on Stoic philosophy. So now we're at three writers: Virgil and the Aeneid, Plutarch and Parallel Lives, and Marcus Aurelius and Meditations. All right, let's leave the world of the written word. And let's enter the world of men who recorded the past. All right. This is still the written word. I forgot what slide was next. Don't tell anybody. All right. This is Tacitus. He is a historian who wrote something called the Annals that criticized the government. And he wrote Germania about the Germanic tribes. That's how we learn about all of the people that lived up in Gaul that Caesar went to war with. Oh, my goodness. We also have Julius Caesar. Did I mention that he is one of the greatest writers to emerge out of ancient Rome? Yeah, Julius Caesar. How do we know so much about how he became a hero in the Gallic Wars? Well, he wrote about it and he made himself sound really good. He was an excellent historian. He wrote about his own military campaigns, which were incredibly important, and his political deeds. He was famous for writing a book called Commentary on the Gallic Wars, which he won, which made him a hero, which made him Caesar, which made him dictator for life. Yeah, you follow me on that? Okay. Is there a chance that you will have a question come up in your future about Julius Caesar writing about the wars with Gaul? Yeah. All right. Livy, a historian who is going to pass down a whole lot of Rome's history to the Western world. Please remember that a lot of this history, is in praise of the people who were in charge during their period of the empire and criticizing the people who came before them. All right. So historians, Tacitus, Julius Caesar, Livy. Who are our scientists? Remember Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine? Well, here is Galen. He is a physician that will take the work that Hippocrates had done and write it down very carefully into cataloged books combined with medical knowledge that had grown in the centuries after Hippocrates. This medical knowledge that Galen will write down is going to create the books that people use to study medicine for treating all types of ailments and becoming doctors on up until the Middle Ages. So like Galen's work is going to be the foundation of studying medicine for 1,000 years. So that's pretty important. Medicine's pretty important to us, right? So Hippocrates invents the idea of preserving life and modern medicine. Galen instructionalizes it so that other people can learn it and medical knowledge can expand. Ptolemy develops important theories on astronomy. And you know what? A lot of them are wrong, but a lot of them also would be right and inspire future thought. His most important theory is called, geocentric theory. It's not right. It says that the earth is the center of the universe and that the heavens revolve around it. But you know what it doesn't say? It doesn't say that the earth is flat. I mean, it shows knowledge of our place within the universe and how the universe works and how the cycles of the universe work and why stars do certain things. So it really opens us up to a whole new set of knowledge and information because he revealed some truths that future science in astronomy would be based off of. Okay. What are the greatest Roman contributions to architecture? Well, I got to tell you, we use this stuff all the time. We're not going to assign names to it, but please remember the role of concrete. You can't go anywhere in our world today without concrete and cement and block and brick and all the things that have derived from its earliest invention, affecting the way that we structure our world today. What is concrete? It's just sand and glue and gravel, but it enabled the Romans and then us to build huge buildings. And the domes that we see on our biggest buildings create huge interior spaces that influence later architecture. So you might say, like what? Well, we have this architecture around us. Here's the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. Look at that Roman dome. Look at those Greek columns. Oh my gosh, look at the fact that it's made out of concrete. We are so inspired by this. So I always want to give you reminders of what I mean when I say Western civilization grows out of this. These are the major people that will come to us from the Roman Empire in the areas of literature and science and history, and also the major figures that will lead the Roman Empire. But there are some really important people that we have not talked about yet that we will be talking about in your next class. People like Peter and Paul and Jesus, all right, that will shape a religion, that will shape the Roman Empire, that will then shape the future of the Western world. Thank you for our look at the people of the Roman Empire, and I will see you for our next class, which will be the rise of historical Christianity. Thanks.